The Russians just lost another Sukhoi 30 fighter plane, while on the Ukrainian side, a new and highly effective modern air defense system has appeared that was developed in just a few months. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened along the front lines and behind them in this SITREP about the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainians struck the refinery in Bashkortostan. They hit the Saratov refinery, the Nizhny Novgorod refinery, the oil depot close to Simferopol, an oil depot in Chankoy on the Crimea. Those two were on Crimea. And we have evidence of the hits against Feodosia, also on Crimea, where we can see how many of the fuel tanks have been destroyed in the past strikes. The Ukrainians also hit the explosives factory Avangard once again, and an explosion, bigger explosion, was seen in videos that were published. The Ukrainians also hit electrical substations in Belgorod, Vladimir, Samara and Volgograd. Power outages were reported. The Russians admit, or here fighter bomber, a Russian mill blogger well connected within the Russian Air Force, admits the loss of a Sukhoi 30. According to him, it's unclear what was the reason for that, but the Ukrainians previously reported it was shot down by friendly fire. So this is something where we talked about it in the past, that intercepting drones is far from being without danger. That's why the Ukrainians have lost several fighter jets while doing so in the past. And while the Ukrainians struck military targets, the Russians have increased the civilian victims by 31% in regards to the previous time last year. So at the beginning in 2025, at the same period 2024, the number of civilian casualties has increased by 31%. The Ukrainians also are reporting that the Russians are now doing attacks with 10 to 40 drones on individual energy targets. They also go from oblast to oblast to strike the electricity infrastructure. So basically 3.5 years inside of the war, we now see oversaturation by the Russians instead of just hitting everything for a little bit. After these strikes, again and again, power outages are reported that pit cities and areas into darkness, with tens of thousands of Ukrainians being without electricity. We switch to the developments along the front line, and here we have the Ukrainians being geolocated again in the center of Oleksivka. Now we have from the Russian side claims that Oleksivka is occupied now by the Russians, but so far the only evidence we have of some sites' presence is here, and here are the Ukrainians. It's probably too early to say that Oleksivka is proven to be in Ukrainian hands, but the Ukrainians are definitely operating inside of it, and Oleksivka should probably be considered a contested area. That's it for the area around Sumy. In Kharkiv, here Vovchansk area, I have no changes to report. In the Veliki Burluk region direction here, we have the Russians advancing in both close to Ambarne as well as close to Odratne. On the map, this is here, roughly here. And at Odratne, they entered the town to the west of it. So at this point, meaning at two areas, they have achieved slight advances. On the eastern front, in the Kupiansk direction, we have a fresh geolocation as well. And this is here. The Russians have reached this point in the center of Kupiansk. We see that the pro-Ukrainian deep state map is already giving this area to the gray zone, to the contested area, and this is more or less confirmed. As said, and this is a theme of the last half year or longer, geolocations only indicate where someone has been. It does not mean that this is a consolidated control, and at least for half a year, if not a year, the Russians are sending ever smaller groups to infiltrate deep behind the lines, often with a flag to show that they've captured it, whereas in reality they have not. From the distance, by just seeing the geolocations, it is not possible in every case to confirm whether this means that the area is now consolidated or not. It's still valuable as it shows us in which direction the dynamic goes. But as said, this does not mean that the Russians have actually cut off the road here to the center of Kupiansk already, especially as those videos usually show a strike against Russian soldiers, on which in many cases the soldier is no longer combat effective after which. That's it from Kupiansk here itself. We have here the British Ministry of Defense reporting that the Russians have taken the majority of the high-rises in the north of Kupiansk. So the northern part here, the high-rises are likely now in under Russian control. To the east of it, we have the Russians entering Piszczane. So here on the map, we have a geolocation of this at this point here. Again, does not mean consolidated control, but probably it should be added to the contested area. And further south, we have Konstantin Mashevets, a former colonel of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, confirming that the Ukrainians likely captured, here he says apparently, complete capture of Chandrihulove. This means that it's not fully confirmed yet, but if a pro-Ukrainian analyst says that it's likely under Russian control, then we obviously assume that he is right. So Chandrihulove is likely now fully under Russian control. That was it north of the river Seversky Donetsk. South of it, we have the Russians advancing west of Vimka. We have that geolocated here at this point, and this should be on the map at this point here, so in advance of probably 500 meters north from the previous contested area, meaning here again the Russians also keep up the pressure. In the Kostiantynivka direction, we have the Russians inside of Kostiantynivka, the first proper geolocations inside of proper Kostiantynivka. This is here. We had the Russians recently in Predtechune, and we also had them inside of the dachas, which are technically part of Kostiantynivka, but not part of the city itself. And now the Russians have reached the outskirts and the outermost houses in Kostiantynivka. So the house-to-house fighting for Kostiantynivka is basically in the process of beginning. Further south, we have a crazy geolocation, and this shows us a Ukrainian soldier being attacked and taking cover in Toretsk. So we still have Ukrainian presence inside of Toretsk. We have that here on the western side, and very close to it he takes cover. This is in, let me quickly check, this area here. We have them here. Here is still Ukrainian presence. Now, where does he come from? For how long did he stay there? Is he a recent counter-infiltration of the Ukrainians? Or do we have a Ukrainian soldier who has not capitulated and is still inside of Toretsk for the past half year without connection on the ground? I have no idea, but it shows that the Ukrainians, as occasionally some Ukrainian voices claimed that they still have a presence inside of Toretsk, and the pro-Ukrainian deep state map even says that this northern part of Toretsk is still contested. So this would be more or less a confirmation that the Ukrainians actually still have a presence inside of Toretsk, despite everything that is already happening to the north of it. The Ukrainians also are still fighting inside of Cherbenivka. We have that geolocated as well. This is here on this part. So here Ukrainian presence is also still confirmed, and the Russians have been attacked by the Ukrainians east of Katerinivka. So here we have Russian presence confirmed. All of this here confirming more or less what the deep state map says, that the Ukrainian presence south of the reservoir is still in existence. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians did their fourth mechanized attack, and we have a video of this that I want to show you. First of all, we see that the column is advancing. This was artillery fire, or possibly a missile. In the quickness I couldn't see it, but we see that the Russians are advancing along the roads, and they are advancing in fairly close column. This was likely a drone hit, and we see the tanks advancing, and we see all of them going in a single file. This is clearly due to the threat of mines. So this forces the Russians to go in a single file, but at the same time, it obviously makes them a much easier target for the Ukrainians, both anti-tank weapons as well as artillery as well as drones, even though there will be overlapping electronic warfare systems to help them with this regard. So this might be one of the considerations, especially when you see how close they drive together, which should make it very easy for artillery to do damage. And those are artillery hits we see here at this point. So the Russians keep attacking with mechanized forces. This was again against Chachove, confirming more or less that the previous attacks have not been successful to a degree that the Russians wouldn't do another attack in this direction. Whether or not they manage to now gain a foothold or not is still unclear, but it shows that the Russians, when they think the weather is permissive in this regard, continue with mechanized attacks. Then we have the Russians north of Mirnograd. They have advanced in directly north of Mirnograd, geolocated here. This is more or less at this point here, so they are flanking and bypassing Mirnograd on the north as well as obviously pressuring in the direction of Mirnograd itself. Then we have a Russian soldier waving a flag in Novopavlivka. Analysts have written that this is likely an infiltration. As said before, it's always possible, and usually when they've consolidated, we see more than just one soldier. So a single soldier is very likely an infiltration, not an actual consolidation of control. So Novopavlivka is probably in the gray zone, in the contested area, but not under Russian control. The Russians have also advanced in the towns of Chunyshine here, as well as in southern Pokrovsk. We have that geolocated. This was it. We have that geolocated here, and we can see that the pro-Ukrainian deep state map says that the Russians have consolidated this part, so it confirms that the Russians have advanced and are holding territory further north inside of Pokrovsk. But this isn't all, because we have the Russian geolocations all over Pokrovsk now, more or less. We have them here. So first to the direct west of it, then here along the road, and then in the center, more or less in the center, close to the railroad yard. So we have the Russians more or less here. We have them here and here. All of these, as said, are infiltrations. They don't mean they are consolidated, but they also mean that the Ukrainians don't have full control over the area here. In one of the videos, Ukrainian soldiers are being defeated, and in another one, Ukrainian soldiers give themselves up. This again does not mean they've taken control over the whole area, but it shows the dynamic the fighting goes inside of Pokrovsk. The Russians are definitely advancing inside of Pokrovsk. That was it from the Pokrovsk direction. The next geolocations we have in the Pokrovsk direction. Here, the Russians have likely conquered the town of Verbove. This is being confirmed again by the British Ministry of Defense, and the Ukrainians are spotted inside of and the Russians have been spotted inside of the town of Pryvillia. This is directly southwest of it. So according to the British, the Russians have consolidated Verbove, and in Pryvillia we have Russian presence confirmed, but likely again just an infiltration. But this again, also just an infiltration doesn't sound like it's a big deal, but obviously infiltrations have to be neutralized, otherwise they become to a consolidation at a certain point. Further south in the Huliapole direction, we have the Russians advancing in Poltavka. Here we have a geolocation to the north of it. This should be here. And we have the Ukrainians advancing in the town of Malinivka, which is directly south of it. Here at this point, the Ukrainians have advanced towards the western part of the town itself. So the Ukrainians are have had some successful counterattacks. That was it with geolocations. Overall, the situation is mostly unchanged. The Russians have successes in this direction. According to the Ukrainians, the infantry, the lack of infantry here is too sizable for them to be able to successfully push the Russians back. The pressure towards Pokrovsk and Minograd is continuing to increase. The Russians are inside of Pokrovsk and about to enter Minograd, so how long that fighting there will continue is unclear. The Russians try to force advances here in this direction to reconnect to the pockets they have to the northwest, but so far this has been unsuccessful. Ukrainians again inside of Toretsk, but while the Russians are very active there in attacking the Ukrainian lines of communication, so far the big successes are definitely not happening. Further advances of the Russians inside of Kupiansk are obviously a problem, especially if they consolidate, as this will threaten the continued existence of the bridgehead over the Oskil here. But overall, while the Russians keep advancing and while the Ukrainians have some minor successes themselves, the overall dynamic is unchanged. The Russians keep advancing, but they lack the perspective of a bigger success. Then we have reports from hybrid warfare. Dutch soldiers in Poland report that unidentified drones were seen at a military exercise and it jammed their communication, which is especially interesting, as an unidentified drone might just be a hobbyist flying over and trying to take some nice pictures for his private collection. But obviously drones like this would not jam communications. So this would be another hint that this was probably a hostile actor. In troop generation terms for the Russians, we have report by the Ukrainian General Staff that North Korean soldiers are aiding the Russians from Kursk, not with ground troops, not by fighting on the ground, but by doing artillery spotting with drones. This is likely, obviously, to gain experience in this regard and improve their knowledge of modern warfare. Then we have this report here that, first of all, this picture has appeared of the Vampire air defense system, and the president of the company responsible says it was developed in just 8 months and is already in operation inside of Ukraine. It works with the APKWS, so the Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System. Those are 70mm Hydra missiles that have received a smart seeker, a laser seeker, so they are suddenly guidable with a laser designator, and we can see that here. This allows the Ukrainians to intercept drones but also cruise missiles with this system, and this is especially important as these missiles are cheap, available in huge numbers, and have proven to be effective against targets that are close to the ground. So both against slow-flying drones as well as cruise missiles have already been shot down. Then we have news from the meeting of Zelensky and Donald Trump in the White House. The result was no Tomahawks for Zelensky. Trump emphasizes he wants to make peace and he believes he can do it. He will use the Tomahawk for achieving peace. Now, this is nothing new. If you've watched my last SITREPs, I said that this is my expectation. We should not misunderstand the talk of Tomahawks as Trump suddenly wanting to support Ukraine. His main goal remains to make peace, and he now understands, or he now accepts the fact that he needs to increase the pressure against the Russians to achieve peace, and the Tomahawk is one of the potential means for this. This is also the reason while the talk is of a few dozen, nothing to change the overall dynamics, but enough to show the Russians what would be possible if more is being sent. So if we see the reaching the goal over everything there, that peace is supposed to be the goal and not aiding Ukraine, then using the threat of sending Tomahawks for diplomatic means is perfectly understandable and perfectly in the context what we have to expect from Donald Trump in regards to Ukraine, Tomahawks, and Russia. He wants to show Putin that he's willing to do that, and he basically wants to do warnings. As I said in the past, we should expect this to take months. Every step along the way, the threat of sending them, the confirmation of sending them, the delivery, everything of these steps will be used to try to force the Russians to continue negotiating, so there will not be a quick delivery, and especially not a quick delivery of huge numbers. Then we have the US Secretary of Defense Hexes saying the costs for Russia have to be increased as long as it doesn't end the war. This is basically just a confirmation that the US government acknowledges that they need to increase the pressure against the Russians to achieve peace. We also have an interesting interview from the Russian foreign minister, Lavrov. He is saying that the Europeans try to turn this war, which was a Biden war, into Trump's war. Now, to use these frames, to use these words is not a coincidence. Here, Lavrov clearly aims to influence the American president in case, like, to make sure that the Americans know that, according to the Russians, so far it's not a Trump war, but it will become a Trump war if he engages more. And this is clearly an aim to deter Trump from getting involved. So we see how the Russians understand the situation and clearly try to play him. We also have the report that Trump and Zelensky talked about an arms deal, millions of Ukrainian battle-tested drones for the US armed forces in exchange for Tomahawks. So this was a discussion. According to Zelensky, Trump is interested, but so far nothing has happened. And then we have the sign that Trump tries to do diplomacy and Putin is achieving in gaining more time. Now Trump has announced that he had a phone call with Putin again, and they agreed on a personal meeting, a second one this time in Hungary. This just means that Putin has once again gained time by sugarcoating, by being nice to Trump. This is what we've seen in the past as well. Interesting, though, is that we get more details from the last meeting from Alaska, and it was announced prior to that they would have lunch together, but suddenly it was cancelled. It was assumed that this might have been due to some problems, some infighting between them. And now it's said that the Financial Times is writing, according to sources, that Putin has denied any chance for a ceasefire as long as Ukraine doesn't capitulate. Instead, he held long monologues about historic kings to basically show that Ukraine and Russia are one, to somehow surprise Trump, to somehow convince Trump with this. According to the Financial Times, Trump got loud and threatened to leave the meeting because he clearly wasn't pleased with this. And if you've watched the press conference at that point, it was obvious that Trump wasn't too happy, but tried to keep a nice face. In the international aid, we have news as well. 300 millions are going to the Ukrainian defense industry from the Council of the European Union. Finland is sending 52 million euros in weapons. Luxembourg is sending a new aid package with armored vehicles, drones, and night vision goggles. Finland and Lithuania are now joining the purchase initiative for Ukraine, which now has 17 member states basically financing weapon purchases in the United States for Ukraine. And Norway has announced they plan to aid Ukraine with the sum of 5.9 billion euros in 2026. That's planned in their budget. And that was it for today's SITREP. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.